Module 2, Lesson 2, Controlling Blood Sugar with Food. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about controlling blood sugar with food. We'll learn how to choose what foods to eat and the quantities to eat. So all the food we eat falls under one of 5 food groups. 1. Carbohydrates. 2. Proteins. 3. Fats and oil. 4. Minerals. And 5. Vitamins. The most important group when it comes to blood sugar is carbohydrates. So we'll be talking more about carbohydrates in this lecture. There are some important terms we need to understand first. 1. Glycemic index. 2. Glycemic load. And 3. Calories. What is glycemic index? This is a scale used to classify foods based on how fast they increase blood sugar when eaten. The scale is ranked from 0 to 100 with water at 0 and glucose at 100. Glucose is used in the ranking because it is the main source of energy for the body. If you remember from our lecture on digestion, all carbohydrates are broken down into glucose because this is the form in which the cells of the body can utilize carbohydrates. All carbohydrates consumed are compared with glucose based on how fast they increase blood sugar. The easier it is for carbohydrates to be converted to glucose, the higher the glycemic index. Simple carbohydrates like sugar, honey, and fructose, which is the type of sugar contained in fruits, have a glycemic index. Complex carbohydrates like maize or cassava have a lower glycemic index. Glycemic load. Have you ever wondered how much carbohydrate is in the food you eat? For example, how much carbohydrate is in one banana or in a plate of rice? Even though foods are grouped under carbohydrates, they have other components. For instance, yam is a carbohydrate, but it also contains fiber and a vitamin called folate. Different foods have different amounts of carbohydrate. Yam, for instance, contains more carbohydrate than okra. For foods grouped as carbohydrates, the quantity of carbohydrate they contain determines the amount of glucose produced during digestion. The higher the carbohydrate content, the lower it takes to convert from carbohydrate to glucose, so the longer blood sugar levels stay high. Glycemic load is the total amount of carbohydrates in a food or meal. The glycemic load of a food or meal is usually stated per a quantity, so you may have per 2 slices of yam or per 1 plate of boiled rice. If you eat a meal made of different food items, the glycemic load would be the combination of all the glycemic loads of every carbohydrate in that meal. Calories. Calories mean energy. Glucose obtained from carbohydrates are used by cells to produce energy, so calories refer to how much energy is produced from the food you eat. Calories, like glycemic load, are also stated per quantity of food. The total amount of calories consumed daily is very important in blood sugar control. It's all quite simple. How carbohydrates affect your blood sugar depends on the quantity you consume, and this is shown by the glycemic load. The type of carbohydrate also affects how fast sugar enters your bloodstream, and this is shown by the glycemic index. Finally, the amount of energy derived from the carbohydrates in your food is shown by the number of calories. Let's look at some examples now so it's easier to understand. On this scale, 100 is the value for glucose and 0 is the value for water. You can see the values for different foods between glucose and water. This data is gotten from a study by Professor Egwim Evans of the Federal University of Technology, Minna. The way food is processed affects how fast it raises blood sugar because processing alters carbohydrates, making it easy to digest. Sometimes Other components are added during processing. Like for fried yam, fat is added and fat takes longer to digest. So, if you eat fried yam, you are consuming both carbohydrates and fat, and this is to an extent reduces the carbohydrate content or glycemic load compared to plain boiled yam. This is why boiled yam has a higher glycemic index than fried yam. Then boiled water yam also has a glycemic index 42 points higher than water yam porridge. This is also because water yam porridge is mixed with other ingredients. A glycemic index less than 55 is the best for patients with type 2 diabetes. Let's add the glycemic load of these foods as well. For this study, glycemic foods are stated per 50 grams of food. A cube of sugar is about 5 grams, so 50 grams is roughly the same quantity as 10 cubes of sugar. Amala and masa, among others, both have a low glycemic load and low glycemic index, so they are a good fit for patients with type 2 diabetes. A glycemic load of 20 and above is high, between 11 and 19 is moderate, and below 10 is low. So aim to eat foods with moderate or low glycemic loads. Foods with high glycemic load can be eaten but in very small quantities. Something else that affects both the glycemic index and glycemic load, aside from the way food is processed, is the species of the food. Jasmine rice has a glycemic index of 109, 9 points higher than the glycemic index of glucose. Basmati rice has a glycemic index of 57, while brown rice has a glycemic index of 50. These are 3 different species of rice, and they all have quite different glycemic indexes. Dark chocolate has a glycemic index of 33, and milk chocolate has 45. So for people who are diabetic or prone to diabetes, it's better to eat dark chocolate than to eat milk chocolate. How about sugar and other sweeteners? Sugar has a glycemic index of 64, while honey is 58. The difference is not as much as most people think. Honey is not healthy for diabetic patients because its glycemic index is more than 55 and its glycemic load is more than 20, both of which are the healthy limits for diabetics. Dates used for date syrup or powder have a glycemic index of 42 and glycemic load of 18. Agave syrup, which is another natural sweetener, has the lowest glycemic index of 13, but it's not easy to get in Africa. Fructose is the sugar in fruits. It has a glycemic index of 15, so is healthy. Diabetic patients should eat small portions of fruit though, because these values are for portions that are roughly the same size as 10 cubes of sugar. One thing we must talk about before moving on is bread. White bread has a glycemic index of 71, while whole wheat bread has a glycemic index of 75. For both types of bread, the glycemic load is 9 per slice. Foods like bread, which have a very high glycemic index and very low glycemic load, make you hungrier faster and make you eat more in the long run. Proteins and fats give calories because they can be converted into energy. Fats are long-term stores, whilst proteins are only used when fat stores have been used up, like when a person is seriously ill and loses weight or during starvation. So, both proteins and fat do not affect glycemic load or glycemic index, but they contribute to the total amount of calories consumed. So, carbohydrates are the main contributors to glycemic index, glycemic load, and calories. This is why they are the main food group implicated in diabetes. To control blood sugar, diabetic patients should Eat more foods with low glycemic load and low glycemic index. Eat small portions of food with high glycemic load. Avoid foods with high glycemic index. Reduce total calorie intake. In the next lesson, we will learn how to eat daily to control blood sugar, lose weight, and maintain weight loss.